Okay, we're going to get started now. I think, actually, before we even proceed any further, maybe we could say, I just left a prayer there for you. I was hoping we'd have one of the priests here, but they're not here, so I'd like to say this prayer to get us started, and then we'll end with a Hail Mary. This is a prayer for religious liberty. Almighty God, Father of all nations, for freedom you have set us free in Christ Jesus. We praise and bless you for the gift of religious liberty, the foundation of human rights, justice, and the common good. Grant to our leaders the wisdom to protect and promote our liberties. By your grace, may we have the courage to defend them for ourselves and for all those who live in this blessed land. We ask this through the intercession of Mary Immaculate, our patroness, in the name of your Son, our Lord Jesus Christ, in the unity of the Holy Spirit, with whom you live and reign, one God, forever and ever. Amen. And now let's say the Hail Mary. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Thank you all for being here. If you don't know me already, my name is Monica Ludwig, and I'm the Director of Social Concerns here at St. Patrick's. And myself and Melanie Baker, who's the Director of Adult Faith Formation, we decided to host this series on religious freedom together. And we wanted to honor those who have fought, and some of whom also have died to protect our country's freedom on the battlefields, in the courtrooms, from the pulpit, and by courageously living out their faith. A couple of preliminary matters in the back. There's a little basket there. Throughout the 5 days, I'm going to take up a collection to support the Catholic University's new Center for Religious Liberty and the Knights of Columbus. One is more on the national front, and another was more the international, to support those efforts there. I also have sent a sign-up sheet around, and if you don't have that, if you could please sign up. I want to just get your feedback and any questions you might have, any follow-up questions you might have. Okay. Our speaker for tonight is Aaron Matthew Weldon. Aaron holds a Ph.D. in systematic theology from the Catholic University of America, where he specialized in ecclesiology and the mission of the Church. He also earned a Master's of Divinity degree from Fuller Theological Seminary and a Bachelor of Science in Biomedical Engineering from Texas A&M University. Currently, Aaron is a Religious Liberty Program Specialist at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. He focuses on educating Catholics about religious freedom and contributes to a blog and also hosts a USCCB podcast on this subject. In fact, it was listening to his podcast interviews with various individuals, but in particular from Archbishop Kurtz on religious freedom, was the major impetus for getting this program off the ground here at St. Patrick's. Please welcome Aaron Matthew Weldon.
Thank you so much for having me. Like Monica said, I work in the Office of Religious Liberty, focusing mostly on our communications and education efforts. So what that means, though, is I'm typically the one writing for other people to give speeches. I'm not normally the deliverer of these sorts of talks. I do a lot of talking points and writing speeches for others. So this is kind of new for me. You'll have to bear with me. But I'm really, this is gratifying to get to come out here and participate in this, because you do all this work on Religious Freedom Week and you don't know, how people are going to respond. So it's really great to get to come to a parish and see at least what one parish is doing. I think it's really great. It's amazing. You have a great lineup this week of speakers, and so it's humbling to be included in that lineup. Like Monica said, the topic for today is how to talk about religious liberty, and I'm going to divide it kind of in three parts. First, I want to say a little bit about the context in which we find ourselves, because you might ask yourself, why do we even have to think about how to talk about religious liberty? Then I'll go over a few points, basically some things that we think at the Bishops' Conference we think are helpful in terms of how to present religious liberty matters. But then really I hope that at least half of our time will be me hearing from you. Because a lot of this stuff, when we're working on kind of how to promote religious liberty, I mean, we rely very heavily on hearing what actually works from people who are implementing these sorts of practices. So I would like to hear from you what you've tried. Have you tried to have these sorts of conversations with your colleagues, with family members, with neighbors? What has worked and what hasn't worked, or what's been your experience with this? So I brought my notepad and pen because I'm going to be taking notes, and I want to hear back from you. I also just should clarify real quick that because Monica mentioned that how the Knights work on international religious liberty issues, and the new center at CUA is going to focus on domestic issues. At the Bishops' Conference, the Office of Religious Liberty deals all with the domestic issues, and then the International Justice and Peace Office deals with the international religious liberty issues, and we do work together. But our focus in my office is on domestic issues. So just to make sure that that's clear. And also I'll just say, because like I said, I do want to hear from you. So at any point in the discussion, feel free to interrupt, or if you have a question or a comment, you don't have to wait till the end for the Q&A. So about our context. Why do we have to even think about this? Religious liberty it's fundamental to what we think of when we think of the American project, or when we think of our country, what our values are. Religious liberty is important. If you survey Americans, almost all Americans will say that religious liberty is important. They'll say that. So it would seem like this shouldn't even be something that is a controversial thing. Let me draw attention to 2 points for why it is something we have to think about promoting when we think about that we have to defend and promote. First of all, I suspect that if you're interested in this topic at all, you probably know that religious liberty has been caught up in what are often called the culture wars, right? So religious freedom is seen to clash with another value that's fundamental in American culture, and that's equality. It may be perceived, religious freedom is often seen to be a cover for bigotry. I'm sure people have heard this. I'm assuming that it's perceived to be a cover for bigotry. It's often common, probably the most common thing you'll hear is that religious freedom is a license to discriminate, is the term that is the phrase that you hear quite often. So this is all bound up with marriage redefinition, rights for gays, lesbians, and transgender people. Religious liberty is seen as this cover for bigotry. Now, on this issue, you're talking about people who know about these religious liberty issues, but they think that those struggles are at best mistaken, or at worst think that they are insincere maneuvers to try to get out of anti-discrimination law. So that's one kind of set of concerns. And it's helpful to keep this in mind, because if you're talking to say somebody who's very big on LGBT rights, that's one set of issues that's very different from this next set. The next set of issues involves people who are just not aware of religious liberty issues at all. Surveys will seem to show that most Americans believe that religious liberty is protected just as it should be. Other studies will show that most Americans don't believe that religious liberty is under threat. I would say this is most people. It's not so much that they are concerned about the license to discriminate. They've just never heard of this kind of stuff at all. In fact, my own parents, when I started working in this office, when I came to Washington to go to the Catholic University of America, I never thought I'd be getting involved in anything related to politics. Systematic theology has nothing to do with with any of this kind of stuff. So when I started working here, my parents asked me what I was doing, and I kind of explained to them some of the threats to religious liberty for different faith-based organizations and Christian institutions. They got it immediately, but they just had never heard of this kind of stuff. So this is a different issue altogether. When we will do exit polling every election year on some of the issues that we care about, and many people will say that they agree with our positions on different issues, but they only somewhat agree. So we get tepid support, but there's not a lot of strong support for a lot of the things that the bishops are promoting. For example, that employers should be able to make hiring decisions based on their religious convictions. People will say they kind of agree with that, but very few people strongly agree with a statement like that. So while pretty much everyone says they value religious liberty, not many people seem to be too concerned that religious liberty may be in trouble. I think, like I said, some of it's because people aren't aware. I think some of it's also because our struggles when it comes to religious liberty issues definitely pale in comparison to the struggles of like Christians in the Middle East, for example. You're going to hear more about that, I think, on Wednesday or Thursday. Nina Shea will be a great speaker on that topic. But I think that because it seems so much worse in the international context, some people may just not think it's that big of a deal in the United States. So there are two different sets of issues, and I think that it's just important to kind of get a sense for where somebody might even be coming from, because, basically to manage expectations. It would be very difficult to convince someone to become a religious liberty advocate if they think that you're a bigot already. I mean, your best bet, the best you can hope for may just be to get them to not think that you're a bigot. So it's helpful to be aware of where different people are coming from. Any questions about any of that?
You said the office is divided between domestic and international. Am I right?
Right.
Where is the dividing line? Like, is it just within what I call continental United States, or goes beyond the borders, or what, like Mexico and Canada? How do you guys differentiate what's domestic and what's international?
So our Office of International Justice and Peace has 5 staff people, and each one is assigned a different region of the world.
Okay.
So there's one guy who is an expert on Latin American politics. That's what he studied pretty much his whole life. So deals with so anything south of the border is going to be for him. Now, when you mention Canada, I don't know that. Yeah, I'm not really sure where Canada would fall, but just in terms of the division of labor, traditionally International Justice and Peace has focused on those sorts of issues. Our office is actually very small. I'm the only person who's full-time on religious liberty. So
domestically.
Yeah, on domestic issues. So we're actually a pretty small office. So in terms of the division of labor, though, it's IJP that's going to be doing all the international type stuff.
Aaron, do you get involved with preparing or attending the conferences of the bishops, the annual conferences?
Oh yes, definitely. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the November and June meetings are our big. As our general secretary likes to say, it's really the November and the June meeting is when the USCCB is in full force, basically, because that's when the bishops are all gathered together. The rest of the year, all the work is taking place in committees. So our committee meets 4 times a year. We update the bishops on different on legislation, on that sort of thing, but then really it's the bishops and the committee that are deciding how we're going to go forward on different things.
So would it be fair to say you get a sense of what concerns religious liberty and all of its facets might get involved in year-to-year discussions?
Yeah, definitely. And the bishops talk to each other even apart from the formal, meeting, the meeting. So, and we're in constant conversation with our committee chair, who's Archbishop Kurtz. So if there's like right now, we're talking a lot about this issue of how to communicate, and that's because that's been a major concern of his. So our work as staff to the bishops, and we really do take our marching orders from the bishops, and then they have different kind of structures for talking to each other. So I don't know if that's helpful for kind of how it works.
Question.
Aaron, since you're saying that about the bishops, do the bishops ever disseminate to parishes that this should be a focus or it's an important topic to cover on Sunday homilies along with the liturgy?
That would be up to each individual bishop. And so, and like I said, when I said that at the beginning, how gratifying it is to see what you're doing, because we can make our resources, make them available to the bishops, do what our committee has asked us to do in terms of developing this stuff. But then in terms of running the diocese, that's up. I mean, the USCCB has no kind of authority over an individual bishop. So I think, you see different bishops have different things that they care about. Different bishops get involved in different things. I think that you probably see the members of our committee get really involved because, they're already involved on it all the time. They're talking about this stuff all the time. So.
I have a question. Does every bishop that comes from every area, archdiocese, diocese, etc., does he have an office like yours in his area, or you represent all of them all over?
Say it again. I'm a little bit hard of hearing. Sorry.
Every bishop that comes from across the United States, that's your area of responsibility, correct? Do they have input from an office similar to yours in their archdiocese, or is this one here in Washington it for the whole U.S.?
Yeah, well, so the structure of it all is that what makes our office a little bit odd as far as religious liberty is concerned is at the diocesan level, no, there is no staff person. There is no office of religious liberty in each diocese. Typically, there will be a pro-life director and a social concerns director, a family life director. And then at the conference, there's each one of those directors kind of has a counterpart, basically. There's an office of family life. There's a pro-life office. And so at most dioceses, though, will have at least one point person for those things. I would say that it probably falls on the pro-life director to do religious liberty stuff at the diocesan level. But it's still a little bit different because, it's just going to be different from place to place, is what I've found working here and working with people in the dioceses.
And I have a question. So one of the Lutherans is the people who are unaware of religious liberty issues. They don't see how it impacts them at all. They can see it internationally because they can see persecution and it's, people are being killed because of their faith and martyred. So I'm more interested in that. How does it impact us, even if tangentially? We don't see it maybe, but if you could speak to that a little bit. Thank you.
Yeah, so most people don't see how it affects them. How do you reach those people? I think a couple of the points that we would want to make might address that. But I would, if there are ideas, I'd love to hear them also. I mean, if we knew all the answers, the problems wouldn't be as bad as they are. I think that part of it, though, is one of the things that we want to emphasize is how fundamental of a right religious freedom is. I mean, what the nature of religious freedom, what it's all about. You're talking about. It's often, religious freedom is basically, it's immunity from coercion, right? That's what Dignitatis Humanae, the church, is teaching on religious liberty. Just the basic bare bones, it's immunity from coercion. The government can't make you do things that you think are wrong, or it can't make you profess a faith that you don't believe. And then when we're talking about something like free exercise, because sometimes religious liberty, it's made to seem like, or conscience rights are made to seem like pure license. Well, if people can just appeal their conscience, they can just do whatever they want and say that it was their conscience. This is something an idea you'll sometimes encounter. But when you're talking about religious liberty and it's being rooted in the human person, that we have a natural impulse to know our Creator, that we have reason, that we have ability to seek out the truth about God, and that then we want to try to live as best as we can, live out the truth that we discover about God. That when you start talking about then religious liberty violations or infringements on religious liberty, you're talking about the government getting involved in a person's relationship with God. I mean, what religious freedom is about it's not license to do whatever you want. It's the freedom to do what you're obligated to do, right? I mean, that's what we're obligated to obey God, and to live in accordance with the truth about God. And so I think that it still does, and it is something we talk about, that it still seems very abstract sometimes. But I think that it's important to realize that a government that can get involved in your relationship with God, which is, the most important relationship, if that can happen, then many of your other rights are not safe either. The prayer we prayed, I underlined it during the prayer. It says, we praise and bless you for the gift of religious liberty, the foundation of human rights. I think we often talk about it as the first freedom because it concerns that first relationship, a relationship between the human person and God. And so I think that maybe I recognize that it's still maybe hard to convince somebody who doesn't see it, but I still think that it's helpful to realize that that's part of what's going on. That a government that can violate your religious freedom you have a lot of other rights then that are in the balance, or that are in a precarious place if your right to religious freedom isn't going to be respected. So I think that part's crucial. I do think that while it may not affect, I guess it depends on where you are, whether or not it's going to affect you. But we have talked a lot about freedom to serve, freedom as the freedom for us to serve. We've tried to emphasize this, that religious freedom is crucial if the church is going to continue to be involved in healthcare, in adoption and foster care services, in education, migration and refugee resettlement. Any social service you can imagine that the church is involved in right now is probably facing some sort of religious liberty attack. Right now a big thing in the news is all the stuff with migration and refugee resettlement. The ACLU, we had an op-ed on this last year, that the ACLU is suing the government for giving us a grant to help with its migrant children because we won't refer them for abortions. That's like, you're talking about one of the best at resettling and working with immigrants and refugees, one of the best in the country. That's being jeopardized by some groups because just over the issue of abortion. Hospitals, I think we probably all know about the issues that they face with not doing gender reassignment surgery, not doing abortion. The abortion issue has been around for so long, most Catholics are familiar with it. But any Catholic institution that's doing this kind of work, and not just Catholic, I mean any faith-based organization is dealing with this kind of stuff, I think that might, even if you haven't been yourself served by a Christian or a faith-based institution, I would hope that we could appreciate, especially with the adoption and foster care issue. And that's something I think my boss, Hillary, is going to be here tomorrow, and we'll probably talk more about this. But there are, I believe, 400,000 kids in the foster care system. And my understanding is that beginning in 2016, drug abuse became the number one reason that children were removed from their homes and put in the foster care system. So many people, we've heard about the opioid epidemic, or you've heard about the opioid and the crisis. It's really putting a strain on the foster care system. And so you've got more children coming into the system. At the same time, we all know about Massachusetts, California, Illinois, the District of Columbia have all shut down Catholic foster and adoption services. But there are other places where there are efforts to do that. There are efforts to challenges to Catholic provision of those services. And recently Philadelphia, the city of Philadelphia, that had their social services, they were no longer allowed to place children in foster care. So that may not affect most people personally, but I would like to think that we could appreciate that most people could appreciate that when you have a big problem, that's not the time to go seeking out heretics. I mean, you need an all hands on deck kind of approach to the problem. And another point that I was going to make was that it's how important it is when we're talking about these particular cases to stick with the facts of what are actually happening, rather than. I think all too often you'll probably notice that the way these issues are sometimes presented, it's made to fit some kind of a narrative. So on the issue of adoption and foster care services, where the church gets challenged on this issue, it's made to seem like they're somehow preventing gay and lesbian couples from adopting children. But in all 50 states and in D.C., gays and lesbians have access to adoption. There's no place where they can't adopt children. So Catholics not being involved in that is not stopping anybody from adopting a child, basically. And it's just important to keep that in mind, that if the narrative is, well, you're somehow preventing people from having access to this service or whatever, that's just not the case. In fact, in Michigan, where there's a lawsuit against a Catholic adoption agency, the couple that's suing, I believe, had to they drove past 4 adoption agencies that would have placed a child with them just to get to the Catholic one, so that then they could be denied and then turn around and sue them. So anyway, I think that may be one way that people who don't know much, who might not think it affects them, it may not affect, like I said, it may not affect me personally, it may not affect others personally, at least right now, but it does affect some people. I mean, it affects those kids who are going to age out of the system, and I don't think anybody wants that.
I think it will affect us if, in fact, they make doctors do procedures that they have said they don't want to do. The reason abortions are going down is more and more doctors are refusing to do them. But there's also other things that doctors, euthanasia, the doctors are just going to leave. So then we will be impacted.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I'm not as familiar with all of, but my understanding is that most medical professionals don't want to do this kind of stuff anyway. So that's a good point.
This particular topic has been around for a number of years. Let me ask a couple of prongs of a question. What, if any, discussion has taken place about it among the bishops, and what conclusions have they made about potentially offsetting this anti-Catholic approach to adopting? If you know.
Yeah, I mean, there may be discussions that I'm not aware. I'm not aware of anything that's specifically aimed at addressing the anti-Catholic piece of it. Yeah, I mean, other than I mean, as far as what we do in our office is, right now the big piece of legislation we're pushing for is the Inclusion Act, the Child Welfare Inclusion Act.